Help me reach 1,000 subscribes. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every comment. Thanks. Elizabeth always believed words could soften reality. That night, she used them the way she always had, carefully, almost kindly. She told herself she wasn't in the relationship, just creating space. James stood across from her in the kitchen, still wearing his work jacket, keys in his hand, listening without interrupting. She said, "Maybe we should end things for now." To her, it sounded temporary, negotiable, something that could be revisited once emotions cooled. To him, it landed differently. James had never been good with half-statements. He heard an ending and treated it like one. They had been together nearly 6 years. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady. The kind of relationship friends described as solid. James was dependable to a fault. He paid bills early, showed up on time, remembered details Elizabeth forgot she'd shared. She liked that about him, even when it bored her, especially when it bored her. Stability felt safe until it started feeling heavy. Somewhere along the way, she began wondering what she was missing, and instead of asking that question honestly, she let it ferment into quiet resentment. That evening started like any other. Dinner half-eaten. A show paused mid-scene, rain tapping against the windows. Elizabeth had rehearsed her words all day, convincing herself she was being mature. She framed it as growth, as honesty. James nodded while she spoke, his face calm, unreadable. When she finished, she waited for negotiation, for questions, for emotion. Instead, he said, "Okay." Just one word. No edge, no bitterness. He placed his keys on the counter, removed his jacket, folded it neatly, and walked past her toward the bedroom. That was the first moment unease crept in. Elizabeth followed him down the hallway, watching as he pulled out a duffel bag and began placing clothes inside with methodical precision. Shirts rolled, shoes paired, charger wrapped. She laughed nervously and said she didn't mean right now, that she only meant some time apart. James didn't look up. He said he understood perfectly. To him, endings weren't conversations. They were actions. He had learned that the hard way long before Elizabeth. As he packed, the silence grew heavier than any argument. Elizabeth felt something slipping, something she hadn't intended to release. She reminded him of their plans, the vacation they'd discussed, the furniture they'd bought together. James paused then, finally meeting her eyes. He said plans only matter when both people are committed to them. His voice was steady, not cold, just resolved. That steadiness frightened her more than anger ever could. If you've ever watched someone accept your decision faster than you expected, tap like, so this story can reach others who understand that moment. James zipped the bag and carried it to the front door. Elizabeth stood frozen, realizing she had underestimated him. She had assumed he would fight, plead, ask what he could change. That assumption revealed more about her than him. When he reached for his shoes, she asked where he was going. He replied that he was leaving, because staying after being told was over would mean arguing against her truth. He respected himself too much for that. The door opened, letting in a rush of cold air. Elizabeth felt panic rise, sharp and sudden. She told him they should talk tomorrow, that this didn't have to be final. James stepped outside anyway. He said some things can't be unheard, and some doors close without slamming. Then he was gone, taillights disappearing into the rain. That night, Elizabeth barely slept. Her phone stayed silent. No apology text, no late-night reconsideration. She told herself he just needed space, the same excuse she'd used earlier. Yet a small voice inside her whispered that she might have miscalculated something fundamental. Comment below. In moments like this, should people fight for love or respect the words that were spoken and walk away? By morning, James had blocked her on social media. His side of the closet was empty. Even his toothbrush was gone. Elizabeth sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the absence, realizing that she hadn't created space. She had created an ending, and James had believed her the first time she said it fully. The first week without James felt unreal, like living in a house staged for someone else's life. Elizabeth kept expecting familiar sounds. His truck in the driveway, the soft thud of his boots by the door, the way he cleared his throat before speaking. None of it came. She told herself pride was keeping him away, that silence didn't mean permanence. Yet every unanswered message pressed heavier than the last, until she stopped sending them altogether. Friends told her she'd been brave, honest, emotionally mature. They said endings were sometimes necessary, that men like James didn't understand nuance. Elizabeth nodded, repeating their words until they sounded convincing. Still, late at night, doubt crept in. She replayed the conversation, searching for a version where she hadn't sounded so final. She realized James had listened to her the way he listened to everything else in his life. Carefully, seriously, without assuming hidden meanings. 2 weeks later, she ran into his sister at a grocery store. The encounter was brief but devastating. James had moved cities. New job, new apartment, no intention of returning. He hadn't framed it as escape or heartbreak. He'd said he was choosing peace. That word followed Elizabeth home, echoing through rooms that now felt too large. Peace wasn't what she'd wanted him to choose. She'd wanted him to choose her, even after she'd told him not to. If this part of the story hits close to home, type the word final in the comments. Elizabeth finally understood the difference between wanting space and wanting control. She had wanted reassurance without risk, commitment without consequence. James had refused to play that role. His leaving wasn't punishment. It was alignment. That realization stung more than any insult could have. There was no villain she could point to, no dramatic betrayal to blame. Just words spoken and taken seriously. Months passed. Life rearranged itself. Elizabeth dated casually, searching for the spark she once feared she was missing. She found excitement, unpredictability, intensity. What she didn't find was the quiet safety James had given without asking for applause. Each new connection felt loud but hollow, like noise filling a room that still echoed. One evening, she opened an old box while cleaning. Inside were photos, notes, receipts from ordinary days. Nothing cinematic, just proof of consistency. She realized then that James hadn't walked out of her life impulsively. He had closed a chapter cleanly, without leaving emotional debris behind. That clarity, once admired, now felt unreachable. Share this story with someone who believes endings always come with shouting, not silence. Elizabeth drafted a message she never sent. It wasn't an apology or a plea. It was an acknowledgement. She wanted to tell him she finally understood what he'd heard that night and why he left the way he did. Writing it brought unexpected relief. Closure didn't require his participation. It required her honesty. She stopped telling the story as the time he overreacted. She started telling it as the moment my words mattered more than my intentions. That shift changed everything. It taught her restraint, accountability, and the weight language carries when spoken to someone who listens. In your opinion, was James too rigid, or was he simply protecting himself? Join the discussion below. Years later, Elizabeth would still think of James occasionally, not with regret, but with clarity. He had shown her that boundaries don't need drama to be real. Some people don't wait for second drafts. They take the first version you give them and move forward accordingly. If this story made you reflect on your own relationships, like the video, subscribe for more stories that explore the consequences of our words, and comment, what would you have done differently in Elizabeth's place? The ending wasn't tragic. It was precise. And precision, Elizabeth learned too late, leaves no room for maybes.